Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a great show for you this evening. We have both Ryan Braun and Ryan Reed here from uAvionix. Really fantastic company and such a fascinating story to go with it about where their products came from, where they're going now and into the future. So many cool things to do. As always, I'm going to start here by showing a little bit about what's new at happening around our area, and I have some really fun things to talk about. Well, the first thing, of course, is that we have a new private pilot here at SocialFlight. Jake Simon, proud dad here, has just completed his private pilot certificate aircraft single engine land on July 9th, last Thursday. And so a new private pilot in the family at SocialFlight, and really exciting. You know, one of the challenges during this crisis has, of course, been flight training. And in the case of Jake's experience, he started his flight training. He was basically ready for his check ride when the crisis hit. And obviously everything shut down, flight schools shut down, etc., training, as well as all of the exams and ability to even rent an aircraft. When that finally started to reopen, it seemed like it was one thing after another. Weather kept canceling check rides, and then the aircraft canceled check rides, and schedules, everything kept happening. But finally last Thursday it happened. He passed with flying colors, so you can see him here. And then the next thing that he was able to do is both proud dad and also his brother, who's just beginning flight training, that's been there with him, got to do their first flights completely solo. And so just wanted to do a shout out to them. You know, we created SocialFlight Live to help support General Aviation during this crisis, and being able to see new pilots minted across the United States as everything starts to open up with safe social distancing and careful flying. It's so wonderful to see as it keeps supporting everything that we love here in General Aviation. The other thing that I'd like to announce is that we have partnered with Avidyne. If you have not heard of what's happening during what was formerly the in-person AirVenture Week, EAA has created the Spirit of Aviation Week, July 21st to 25th. That's beginning Tuesday of next week. And we have partnered with Avidyne to bring some fantastic content to you in the evenings. We are in the spirit, if anyone has ever had the opportunity of going directly to AirVenture, one of the things that you must know, of course, is that the Avidyne events are some of the best features of the show. They last year had this inflatable pub that was really something to see, that they had all of their both customers and other prospective customers come in and be able to celebrate and meet the Avidyne team and spend some time there. And so they are always known for having really wonderful events, and they have decided to continue that spirit. In addition to the technical presentations that they're going to have, where you can learn about Avidyne products, they're going to have these evening presentations that we will be working with them on and presenting as part of SocialFlight Live, including some really fascinating guests who I cannot name yet, but I can guarantee you they will be exciting to see. And so you can learn about this and sign up at avidyne.com, and also it will be featured on SocialFlight and in our Friday SocialFlight weekly email update. So stay tuned, very cool things coming with that. Next, I'd like to just introduce the company and the people here from uAvionix. Now, uAvionix came onto the scene with some truly innovative products at a time when everyone was struggling with the concept of ADS-B and how we were going to afford and put it into aircraft and do it in a way that didn't require tearing the entire aircraft apart. And they came out with some very innovative products in their SkyBeacon, which was the really probably the most famous at this point product that mounts right on the wing in place of one of the nav lights and gives you a UAT solution, and then also followed on with their TailBeacon. Following that, they're getting ready to release their TailBeacon X, which we'll talk about, has so many other things associated with it, including diversity, a 1090 ADS-B solution, so lots to talk about there. And then in addition to that, of course, there's portable products in their Sentry ADS-B receivers. Finally, They went through working together in an acquisition with uAvionix, were able to bring these panel products to market, the AV30 and the AV20S. And I'll tell you, we are so impressed by both of these products that we're actually integrating them into the Mustang here behind me that's getting built. Jake and Ben are working on the rear seat panel in particular, designing a panel there that's going to be all around the AV30. And also we need, if you fly an aircraft like this that you want to yank, bank, loop, and roll, then you need a G meter. And one of the very cool features about the AV20 is it's going to give us that G meter capability, all sorts of other features, timers for IFR flying, just a ton of stuff. And so I just wanted to give everyone a peek and reminder of what this amazing company is all about before we introduce our guests for this evening here on SocialFlight Live. So I am pleased to welcome Chief Operating Officer Ryan Braun. He has over 20 years of entrepreneurial and product development experience. As an engineer, Ryan worked to shape a diverse set of products, including mobile devices, high-speed storage area networks, automation, drones, which we'll be talking about a little bit later, and network security and avionics. As an entrepreneur, he has founded and served in executive roles for several companies in markets as diverse as internet startups, contract engineering, and of course, aviation. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of Iowa and is a private pilot. And along with Ryan Braun, we have Ryan Reed, who is Director of Marketing and Communications at uAvionix. Ryan's got a fascinating story. He used to borrow RC helicopter magazines from the school library and watch A-Team with his favorite TV character, Murdoch, flying the helicopter. Later in life, he obtained his rotorcraft license and finally got to fly full-scale helicopters. He spent several years collecting LiDAR and geospatial data throughout the Rocky Mountain West in the Cessna 206, and of course, an MD-520 helicopter. And he joined uAvionix to help advance cooperative airspace for all aircraft, past, present, and future. Welcome, both of you gentlemen, to SocialFlight Live.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Very kind intro.
Well, you know, I have been fascinated with both of your products, and both of you were there at the very beginning, founding this company. And from the minute that I saw that that SkyBeacon first came out, I said, you know, someone's finally done it. They finally figured out how to combine this, you know, cutting edge technology with the FAA process to make all of this happen. So tell us a little bit about what was involved in getting the company going.
Well, we probably have a little different background than a lot of the aviation companies out there. We came from the whole concept of founding the company from a technology perspective. So we went out to Silicon Valley venture capitalists and pitched the concept of universal equipage and really being able to enable drones. So a number of us have worked in the unmanned space previous to this, drones, RC, and we saw this huge problem from the pilot's point of view that there was no way for these drones and for these RC helicopters to avoid hitting the full-scale aircraft. So as hard as we were working on these problems of how do you not hit the tree, how do you not hit the power line, what we cared more about was how do you not hit the airplane, because we wanted to enable that type of integration. And that was a problem, thankfully, that venture capitalists were interested in solving. But we kind of had ulterior motives all along for this, and that we knew when we created a technology like this, we were going to be able to bring this into the full-scale manned aviation space. When you look at the market and when you look at the type of products that have been out there, it's very difficult to spend a lot of engineering money on products when you're selling hundreds of them a year, maybe. We felt all along, and we still feel very passionately that the unmanned market is a secret route to be able to hopefully gain more pilots over time, but also to be able to really bring that technology back into the manned aviation space and to do it cost effectively. So, we set out with both of those goals in mind and started with building really some core technology, a chip that could do ADS-B, which certainly did not exist and does not exist outside of our products. And we've really had to build up an ecosystem of unique technologies that are really miniaturized. So we need things that operate in drones and operate in modern avionics to be lightweight, low power, and low cost. And those aren't synonymous with most existing manned aviation applications. A lot of the platforms are 15, 20 years old that are being reused and really are not the best way to go about implementing some of these unique form factors and things that we wanted to do.
Right.
So we showed up at Oshkosh. What was our first AirVenture, Ryan? Was that
2016.
2016. He's better with dates. And we thought, well, what's the coolest thing that we could do here, showing up as a brand new company who really up to that point had only been working in the drone space. And we said, well, everybody needs an ADS-B receiver. Lots of people have them, but lots more people could have them. And we could do it in a really unique form factor and make them really small and low power. And we brought that to market at that show. People were clamoring for them. That was what's referred to as the original Ping Buddy, and that was our first aviation product, our first manned aviation product. So from there, things escalated quickly, and we started thinking about ways that we could use the small core chipsets that we've created to create some of these unique applications.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what we've worked on, and we'll talk about products, of course, but we've worked to try to bridge that gap between Silicon Valley, who's very, very good at innovating, but doesn't always understand the constraints that certification and some of these safety critical products really require. And the other side of the equation there with the FAA and the traditional certification approaches, now how do we meet in the middle with that and be able to innovate and make these things cost effective and really unique?
And that's always been the challenge, right? I mean, general aviation is such a restricted small market. We like to think of ourselves as being the center of our universe, of course, but it's not. There's so many companies in the past that have thought that they could bring consumer technology in, and as soon as they dipped their toe in the water, they saw what was really involved or experienced it one way or another and went running the other direction. I mean, now, Ryan Reed, you came from the helicopter market, of course, and that space has so much see and avoid. I remember early on, when I was involved in the UAV business, it was the same thing. Like the killer thing was, how is this entire market going to deal with the see and avoid concept?
Right.
So what was your story of coming in?
Well, so I call myself a drone denier because for a long time, so my wife's a land surveyor. I was doing geospatial work with rotorcraft, and every time we would open our mailbox, it was stuffed full of magazines for surveying and geospatial collection, sensor data, and it was all about how drones were going to make me obsolete, going to make my business obsolete, going to make the pilot obsolete, right? And so I didn't want to hear that. At the same time, I met this mad scientist named Paul Beard, and we were working on a UAV project. And Paul showed up one day with this fixed wing aircraft that he'd put a low cost drone autopilot in. And the winds were blowing probably 15 cross. They launched this little foam wonder, and it flew better than I ever could fly, right? Autonomously. And so that was extremely frustrating. But also the moment when I said, well, if you can do that for $100, how do we get that in aircraft, right? How do we get that? How do we bring that to guys like me who would benefit from the increased margin and safety benefit at a reasonable cost? And so for me, that was kind of the light bulb moment where I stopped so much opposing drones and seeing that a low cost UAS solution that was certifiable could do really powerful things for general aviation. And so that guy that I met, Paul, actually is the CEO of uAvionix today. But for me, the moment where I switched from despising drones, and what they represented, to really appreciating them is when I saw that same thing that uAvionix is trying to do, right? Is take
Mhm.
the existing silicon, let's have a code base and a design base that's certifiable, and let's bring that over to General Aviation. At the same time, the see and avoid message is extremely compelling. If you've flown any aircraft, rotorcraft or fixed wing, it's fairly high workload already, and now you're trying to look for this. I have trouble seeing full-scale aircraft, so the idea that there is a quadcopter out there that's the size of a basketball that can move sideways or backwards or in ways that normal aircraft don't, that's a problem that needs solved, for pilots, all
Yeah.
pilots of UAS and pilots of rotorcraft and fixed wing and gliders, and so, I guess it's exciting to talk about the technology and the markets, but of course we're also pilots, and so what we're most passionate about is flying. And how do we take the experience that we've had with, the smartphone, or computers or iPads or any of this technology, consumer electronics, that has it's completely removed the barrier, right? Any person can pick up a smartphone and do amazing things when 10 years ago you would have needed a degree in computer science in order to pull it off. And so how do we do that, but also maintain the experience of command and control of an aircraft, to keep that, as pure as possible? Autopilot and all those things are amazing, but I also still want to hold fashioned. I want to fly the aircraft. And so that's something else that informs our design. Ryan already touched on size, weight, and power. I've been in the conditions at density altitude with payload where the choice is the payload or another gallon of fuel, right? And everybody knows that more fuel is more margin and more time. But so by taking a 5-pound transponder and reducing it to a couple 100 grams or 50 grams, that's another gallon of fuel. That's more flight, or more capability for the mission. And so I was kind of shocked coming into avionics from a pilot background that there really wasn't a focus on size, weight, and power in the industry.
No, it's interesting that so many of the innovations that have happened in the market have been around that. But I mean, there's a lot of challenges. So take me back. If you go back in time, I remember the early days with Capstone and ADS-B first kicking off. One of the biggest challenges to avionics companies at the time was, the first challenge was there wasn't much of a standard to know exactly what you really had to build to do it. Then you had breaking new barriers through that. So tell me a little bit about what was involved in getting something, that you knew you could at least code to be able to both send out ADS-B and receive, but crossing that barrier to the certified world. And I know, Ryan Braun, you had some stories about this.
Yeah, we as you said, we can't just go out and buy a chip that does this. And there are plenty of general purpose platforms that have been put together. I think people are very familiar, of course, with StratX and the great work they've done with software-defined radios and things. But there's limitations and problems that present themselves around using that, especially in a certified solution. And in meeting some of the performance requirements as well. So you referenced the requirements. Those, luckily by the time we got in the space, they've been pretty well set and through multiple revisions of them. So we didn't have to fight too many of those early battles, but what we did have to fight was a lot around how we can really do a unique installation, because when people created these, they assumed that they would look just like every box has ever looked for the last 50 years, right?
Big chunk of anodized aluminum with a heat sink and everything else that went around that.
Right. And also the specifications and assumptions that you will absolutely take this device and connect it to that device. And it will have to be connected in this manner and use this protocol, and then you change the paradigm and you put it all in one enclosure, and you're trying to map the requirements for the antenna location and how it's cabled. it was,
I want to make sure people understand, because I don't think most of the people out there in the market in general understands that the most significant thing I've ever heard out of your company that was so revolutionary is the idea that you're going to make the chips that do this.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what you don't hear anyone talking about, is making the chip that does it, that can be used even in other people's products.
I mean, it takes millions of dollars, of course, to go off and do projects like that. And, we believed that it was worthwhile to do it because of this large market out there for UAS, and because it's the only way we could enable these applications. But creating the chip was absolutely critical, because you can't go on, our founder, Paul Beard, always says, you can't go on DigiKey, which is a parts, electronics parts supply, and order an ADS-B chip, right? It doesn't exist. There's nothing in those frequency ranges. These are protected frequencies. Why would anyone make anything for them? And, when you talked about quantity, having worked and built things in the consumer electronics industry for, the last 20 years, if you call up and you say, hey, I want to build 100,000 of, this device, you'll get laughed out of the room. Right? No one will talk to you in today's market space unless you say you're going to build 10 million of something, because that's what the cell phone model has done. And that's a wonderful thing, because chips that never would have existed before exist now, but nobody wants to talk to you, and they certainly don't want to make a special version of something unless you're talking tens, hundreds of millions of units, maybe even billions. I mean, when we talk radio chips, Bluetooth chips, accelerometers, things like that, it's been enabled by the fact that everyone has a cell phone. And so we wanted to straddle that line of developing new where we had to, and yet still being able to find a way to certify and adopt some of the critical pieces of very well accepted commercial technology. And that's something the FAA has been pushing hard on for the last 5+ years, 5-10 years really, how they can have policy around that. And we had to do some pretty unique things, and the FAA, their policy and innovation group, was really critical to what we were able to do. And really it was being able to bring in some of these really small, lightweight things that they've never seen before. But yeah, we did our own radio chip for this, so that can send and receive ADS-B. It's a pretty adaptable chip, and that chip is in every product that we make, from a single chip solution that we sell to unmanned vendors that they integrate in their drones, through our Sentry receive products that we partner with Flight on, all the way into our transponders, SkyBeacon, TailBeacon. That's the core of it, and that is what we call the ping chip. And it's a few millimeters by a few millimeters of very high technology radio.
So I have to ask, like, even in general terms, how were you able to conquer those two things that you said? Because on one hand, you have the issue of how do you make a chip when you don't have a billion customers, or even in the millions of them out there, and be able somehow to make that happen. On the other hand, you also mentioned the certification side, where it always used to be that the building blocks of avionics had to be pre-certified, had to be things that were going to be acceptable to the FAA, or you couldn't get started, which is why all of these older avionics were all working with, chips, Intel chips from, so many generations old, and before, than what people had in commercial space, or in the regular market, just because that was the only thing the FAA was willing to tackle. Somehow you nailed both of those.
Yeah, I'll take the first part.
Sure.
Ryan can handle the certification piece, but the key is human capital. It's having the right team, and it's having passionate aviators who believe so much in what they're doing, and of course with the technical expertise to accomplish it. And that same team having a track record of success in other industries where they delivered in the tens of millions of products shipped, so that you have a unique DNA of accomplishment and passion, and you get everybody together, as again referencing Paul, but two of his famous kind of mottos are, it's not mission hard, it's mission impossible. So if it's just hard, we're not going to do it. And two is bias for action, right? So actually just moving things forward. We didn't spend, several years working on solving all the problems, right? We decided we would go out and either succeed or fail fast. And and you can see that in sort of the rapid iteration. But as far as getting the funding and then being able to create silicon, that I would say is 100% the team.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when it comes to certification, Ryan?
Well, the certification, I'll give a lot of credit to FAA for sure. There's been this push, as we've seen out there, with what we call STC PMA product, and really that's not saying a lot other than we're finding new ways to comply with the laws. And as someone, Jeff, who has experience in this in the past, there was no way to do this 10 years ago. You would go in and the FAA would say, if it's not exactly by this book, there's no way we're going to do that. We thought originally that we were going to be able to pursue and use some of the new guidance that has been issued around software, around this STC PMA when we created SkyBeacon and TailBeacon. It turns out we were not allowed to because of some very obscure things that got written into the law around how you must comply with the rule, essentially. And what it comes down to is it said you have to do this a certain way. It was prescribed that you must prove your design assurance a certain way. And so we started thinking it would maybe be easier than it otherwise ended up being. And at the end of the day, we really had to go a pretty traditional route on much of our system as far as what they call DO 178, DO 254. So it's not like a lot of the systems that you see today that are using this more progressive software guidance. We are doing that on some of our other products, and we'll get to that. But really, for our core ADS-B products, we had to adhere to the same laws that have been exercised and used for many years. But we did get a lot of very useful progressive guidance that's being harmonized internationally now. And we were the first company to be able to utilize this. They wrote this guidance for us and around what we are doing with our products, and it is now being made part of an international standard, if you will.
Wow.
And it allows you to take blocks of technology and say, that's been in this type of product with millions of uses, and we can prove that this piece of it works. But we didn't do that for a lot. We did it very selectively, where we knew there was no point in going back and recreating a certain function that you would have to spend $5 million to go recreate, when it's obviously very well proven. You don't go recreate a Wi-Fi chip just because you want to certify a product. It doesn't make any sense, right?
No.
There's a lot of Wi-Fi chips out there. If you're doing that, you're wasting money and you're wasting consumers' money. And so what we were able to do is piece together a really unique approach to that, and that full path is a very good question. That full path of, do you have the right people who know the right people in the industry, who have had a track record of success to be able to sell high quantities of products that no one thought you'd ever be able to sell high quantities of? And then do you have people that can connect up those dots with regulators and other people in industry and get people to buy in and develop an ecosystem? These are the things that we've been working very hard behind the scenes on. And clearly we've been very, very successful, and the reception for SkyBeacon and TailBeacon has been just beyond our wildest expectations. I mean, we all had ideas what it could do, and we have been beyond heartened and gratified with what we have seen, because it really did build a company for us that is going to be able to take the same approach into a lot of new markets and into a lot of new pieces of technology that we're putting into the cockpit.
Well, it really fascinates me, and I find it inspirational, I think, to everyone or anyone listening right now to the show that is thinking about, getting involved in innovation within general aviation. You guys hit every aspect of what it takes in the perfect storm of making things successful. You managed to leverage something outside of general aviation in order to get the economies that were going to work to make a product inside aviation. You managed to work with the existing standards in ways that some people don't have to, but you managed to work with them, while at the same time, certainly if I understand you correctly, leveraging the thing that most people have not been successful from before, which is to point the FAA outside into the commercial world and say, there is some proof point here of success with these products that, or this technology, that we have to be able to backwards translate in areas that we don't have to follow all the same regulations on. And and that's a very unique thing that I think benefits all of us.
And a good example of that is the GPS. When we were working on the SkyBeacon GPS, which now resides in many of our products, there's no way you could get a certified GPS in that small of a form factor. It has to be, size of a quarter, for lack of a better comparison, right? It has to be very, very small. And yes, you can get a GPS in your watch, but no, you can't get a certified GPS in your watch. And they're very, very, very different things. They both give you a position. Beyond that, they're very different in how they have to process the data, the requirements that they have to meet, and the level of integrity. And so, you can be selective and you can use things, but we ended up doing a GPS design from scratch. There's not a lot of companies that have done that. Very, very few in the last 10 years. I can count them on one hand, I think, in the aviation space who have tackled that.
And when you say that, you're talking about a chip, not like companies that have created a board that is a GPS and then has, other people's certified chips on it. You're talking the chip that can go in a variety of products.
That's right. Yeah. And so it's a very adaptable kind of front end, back end solution. The technology is very fascinating, how it's achieved. But at the end of the day, we get a device that has no, performance drawbacks. Right? We're not looking to do something at our company that is going to be almost as good as that other device. Now, it has to perform exactly the same or better, but it has to do it at 1/10 the power and 1/10 the size.
Right.
And it has to probably do it in a unique way, because otherwise someone would have already done it that way.
Right.
So every product that we look at, we kind of view through that lens. And from an engineering standpoint, I'm just incredibly proud of the team, what they did to be able to create that GPS in an insanely short period of time. I don't know, how, how people can be so motivated and so apply so much energy to something over a short period, because I've worked at a lot of companies and I've seen some cool stuff, but getting to a product like that, and people will say, there's no way you actually did that. Right? We hear that a lot. There's no way you can certify it. There's no way that it's possible that you actually did that. And we did. And the proof has been in the pudding. And that's our baseline now. That's where we're starting from.
That's absolutely fascinating. Now, I mean, Ryan Reed, you've got some good stories. Tell me about how, all of your products, the core products, the Beacon products, are based on this concept of, hey, every airplane's got lights. Like,
right.
We'll just replace that.
Yeah.
What's the history on that?
Yeah. So going back to that first AirVenture and Ping Buddy and all the interest in ADS-B, we also had this little box that would become one of our experimental products, the Echo UAT. And at that time, no pun intended, the light bulb hadn't come on yet. We are all pilots and some of us aircraft owners. And we were looking at solutions for our own airplanes, right? We got to equip, there's a mandate. We go out and get quotes for the installation, and you'd break it down and you have box A, $2,000, installation $2,500.
Right.
and we realized, well, as Ryan Braun used to say, we're at a point where we could build a box and give it away for free. It's still going to cost a pilot several $1,000s to equip. So that's when we started to look away from the box model really, aggressively. And I think Paul was actually the first person to mention the light bulb, and it was one of those things that he threw out, and we kind of said, yeah, that's funny. Yeah, next, and swipe next. I remember over several conversations, he'd say, well, what about the light bulb? What about on the wingtip? And I don't think you could do that. And
that's
so then
what we need to do is tackle a whole new set of regulations around lighting.
Yeah. Well, then we walked around AirVenture and Sun and Fun and our home airports, and we start looking at aircraft and trying to figure out, okay, where can you put this thing where you have that unobstructed view of the sky, an unobstructed view of the ground, right? You need to meet the installation requirements, and there are very few places on an aircraft where you can achieve that, and then add in the challenge of we want to install ADS-B without modifying the aircraft. So if you have to punch a hole in an airframe, if you have to run a new wire, scrap that design. And it was sometimes contentious. We sort of proofed the prototype very early on before we'd settled on final mechanicals or anything. We flew a device just to see that indeed you could put it on the wing and it would work. And so the wingtip and the tail seemed like the best options. But then the challenge becomes, so how do you package it so that you're not appreciably larger than the existing device? Mm-hmm. And again, going back to Ryan's comment, the SkyBeacon, if you go look at your average TSO GPS antenna, just the antenna, not the receiver, not the ADS-B portion, it's larger than this entire device. So, how do you package it? Well, that's where we were really set up well for success, because we'd spent, the last couple of years working on products for UAS and a focus on size, weight, and power. And so I have one on my desk here if I can find it, but this is the Ping 2020i. This is a UAT 20-watt transmitter with the rule compliant GPS. And so we were able to take those core blocks that we had established, and then you trip over certification and you realize, well, yeah, we can build it, but can you certify it? And then we had to take, some of these core blocks and strip it all the way back down to 0 and approach it with DO 178, DO 254 at the forefront. And then, of course, Ryan can always speak much better on this, but then take it to regulators and get approval for those blocks, and then move to environmental testing and all of the other testing that's required.
And for viewers there, DO 178 is the software regulations under the FAA for certified software, and DO 150, 154 is all the side of hardware that has to do with all this. Now, Ryan, Braun, you've got this device now out at the wingtip, and you got power coming out to it because it was originally just a light. So all of that is set up, but now you have to control it. How did you tackle everything from configuration to communication and all of those things with an iPhone?
Yeah, right. So the thought is you want to make this thing as inexpensive as possible to install, configure, and maintain. And that definitely presented a number of challenges. And from the outside, when you look at some of these certification projects and why does it take so long, it's a lot of these battles going in the background that we know that there's sometimes shorter paths to get there. But if we take that path, it's going to cost everybody $100 a year down the road, right? They're battles that I think work on very strategically that end up with a better product for the customer for the long term.
And, so you're talking about maintenance, right? Like ongoing maintenance.
Yeah, and really everything. But maintenance is a big one. So we said, well, first of all, we don't want them to have to go to a regular shop that has a $50,000 piece of test equipment and an old Windows 95 computer in the corner that's dedicated to running our installer application. Right? I mean, this should be something that, just like a piece of modern consumer electronics that you buy and can configure. Right? So that of course led us to, we're going to do it over Wi-Fi. We're going to do it using an iPhone app or an Android app, and that's one of those things the FAA looks at and they say, no, you can't do that. You can't configure a piece of certified avionics that's broadcasted into the national airspace with an iPhone. How do you know it's doing what you say it to do, right? And so it's months of circular arguments of, well, here, look, I pushed the button, it did it. Now I see, look, you can see it did it, but how do they know? Right? And so there's a lot of those type of things that take place lot of things that were innovated that we can look back on a couple years later now and say that wasn't a big deal. But it really, in retrospect, was pretty important, a lot of those things that we did. And some of the other things that really make that story and made it a very compelling device is, we can't have more wires running, so we have our communication technology that enables us to synchronize the squawk codes and to your existing altitude encoder in the aircraft. We've got some really unique technologies around how we do the altitude encoding. So the SkyBeacon and TailBeacon have pressure altitude sensors in them, altimeters, if you will, but they have to report the same thing that your aircraft is reporting, even if your aircraft's wrong.
Right.
So there's some pretty unique things we did there, some really unique FAA approvals that I know have never been done before, they ever envisioned happening around continuously calibrating these devices with no user intervention. So we tried to take the big picture to that, and we look for that in all of our products, how we can do something unique that other people might not get to, and really that it benefits the pilot in the end.
Yeah.
So let's level set that for people just for a minute, so everybody understands who's out there, that you still have a transponder. Like, that's how this technology works. You've got your transponder that remains in the aircraft, that continues to work. ADS-B is supplemental to that, a different technology that's working outside using the UAT band, and it has to send out your position, your altitude, information about you, what your, the number that your aircraft is, and those things have to be in sync. And so that's what I think you're talking about here, is how do you do that? How did you come up with the technology, of course, that kept the SkyBeacon and TailBeacon sending the same information, seeing the squawk code that someone put into their transponder, and that there aren't variations between those things that then have to be maintained in the future? Is that right?
That's
right. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan, if you'd like to.
Well, I guess just to kind of circle back there, one of the things that Ryan touched on that just want to make as obvious as possible is the amount of effort that goes into something like that in terms of the development, the approval, and all of the verification. Those things, unfortunately, sometimes they're serial efforts. They can't happen in parallel. And so when we decide to do it, sort of disrupt the flow or change the paradigm for how a certain task is accomplished, there usually is, unfortunately, a time cost with that in the development and certification. And so again, if we could take an easy path and say, well, you just got to run some wires out to the SkyBeacon from your altitude encoder, and could have completed the certification months sooner. But at the same time, we weren't going to deliver the value, and we weren't going to deliver the product that we all envisioned from the beginning without doing that. And so sometimes the hard choice is not the hard part is not the technological accomplishment. It's knowing that you may impact the sales of that product in the short term, and the ability to get it in the customer's hands, because you're trying to do it right and the way that you envisioned it from the beginning.
Right. And so all that extra work was to keep true to your vision, that you would not have additional wires running through the wing, additional things happening, additional installation costs. That if it was just going to be those two power wires going to a nav light, you had to do all that extra certification work.
Right. Yeah. You had to prove the technology. So this is a hilarious one, but squawk codes, right? So poor person in the company sat there and punched in 4,096 squawk codes, and we validated that it came in. And it came out.
Oh God.
And
welcome to FAA testing.
Yeah.
We didn't really get to the background of SkyBeacon, TailBeacon, and how it operates, but you pointed out that you do need to keep your existing transponder, and the goal there, of course, was ease of retrofit. The US is pretty unique in that they've allowed this technology where people can maintain their existing systems, generally less disruptive. It's not the solution for everybody, but UAT is always has been and probably will continue to be the most cost-effective way
Right.
for folks to equip because it's lower power transmitters and there's some, it can sit side by side. So you don't have to tear apart your static system, things like that. That being said, we of course are not just looking at those UAT type of devices. We do have a device you mentioned earlier, the TailBeacon, which is actually a transponder replacement. And that's something, a lot of folks have said over the years, well, when's the transponder replacing version coming out? Because I have a, AT-150 or a old ARC transponder in my Cessna. And, I said, well, stick around, we'll have something in the next show for you to look at. And so we started showing last year what has now become the TailBeacon. We've submitted certification for that now and showing a version of it there. And this one will allow you to remove your existing transponder. It certainly has legs in the US, but it's really uniquely an international product as well. Where TailBeacon and SkyBeacon only work in the United States. This product is designed to work worldwide.
Let's just level set everybody for that. So there are two ADS-B technologies obviously out there. There's UAT, works on the frequency of 978, and there is just known as 1090, which works. And UAT is the technology that many people have opted for in the United States because it's lower cost. But of course, all the benefits of what comes into the cockpit is all through UAT, both your traffic and your weather. For a lot of people there. The challenges, of course, for everybody is that you can't go over 18,000 feet. You can't operate outside the United States using that UAT technology, and its supplemental requires you to keep your existing transponder. Outside the United States and inside, if you use a 1090 box, then you're sending out data that you can use everywhere, and that is what led you to this unit, the TailBeacon, correct?
It is.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'll add, of course, is that then you have Canada, which now is looking at or is already saying that they are going to do a satellite-based system, which requires something called diversity, which means that your antenna has to work from the top and from the bottom, meaning essentially two antennas. And so talk to us about this new system, this TailBeacon.
Yeah, well, I'll reel back just a little bit. Like Ryan said, there's every show there were the guys were like, okay, well, you got the SkyBeacon, the TailBeacon, but where's the 1090 one? I know you guys are working on one. You got to be working on one. And it goes back to that product vision, right? So yeah, we were building and have built several very small Mode S transponders. This is 250 watt Mode S. So
that's so tiny.
Yeah. And so again, it wasn't a question of, well, can we do that? The question is, should we, and how do we do it differently? How do we bring more value, and how do we do something that the other boxes maybe don't already do, right? And so diversity and/or the ability to communicate with space-based ADS-B, Ariane, Spire, these space-based receivers, that's when I think, again, we said, okay, now we see that piece that we can bring that makes this, worth pursuing and not just coming out with, TailBeacon 1090, let's say, where it's designed to. Yeah.
So the standard battle all over again, basically. I mean, you've now got a transponder as part of it. You've got diversity. You've got everything in one with control head. Did you have to? Is it almost going back to scratch to do something like that?
It's not. We're able to leverage a lot of our components and a lot of things, our techniques, our GPS. But if you had even told everyone in our company 2 years ago that we would have been able to miniaturize this transponder, which is essentially a 250 watt plus transponder, and put it right next to a very, very sensitive GPS. I have a home automation system here that likes to turn my lights off, and put it right next to it. And we're talking one antenna right on top of the other. You would say that's not possible. Right? You've got one thing that needs to hear these really quiet satellites up in space, and another thing that is blasting out all the way into space. They don't coexist, but they do. And it's been a lot of effort and thousands and thousands of designs probably to get there for that. But it does use a lot of our technology that we had in the previous unit, some directly and some with modification.
Yep.
You know, what we see here again is, like Ryan said, a unique thing that other people probably can't do yet. The standards for ADS-B have been set for years, and now they're not again. And you know, given if it was our choice, that would not be what we would say. But you know, a lot of external market factors and regulatory factors are impacting that outside of the U.S. And you know, the U.S. came along pretty early on in the mandate game, and not too early. They didn't take the very first set of standards. They took the second set. And now that we're, call it 10 years later, you know, other countries are finding different applications, and probably no one else will build a system like the U.S. did. You know, we're very lucky here that we have this ground infrastructure with free weather, and we've built ground infrastructure setups in other countries as well, and that's a business that we're in. But to the extent that it was done in the United States and the money that was spent, it's not going to happen as much. And when you look at Canada, which has large expanses, especially up north, that can't be well served by ground infrastructure, they, along with everyone else, are looking at space. Right. And the only airplanes that comply with that concept are jetliners. Right. And you know, then the thought was, well, what do you do with all the small airplanes, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't understand.
And there's no carrot to it. They're not giving you anything for it. You're not getting the weather and the at least not the weather.
Not yet. Yep.
Not yet.
Not yet. We hope someday that we can help roll that out worldwide. But yeah, you are being told in a lot of these countries, and it will continue to spread, that you know, it's important that they know where you are, right? And it's operationally more cost efficient to have ADS-B, and the safety benefits, of course, are very clear at this point, that if you have two airplanes with ADS-B, the chances of a mid-air are going to be much less, and that scares every pilot. And you know, I love the fact that we are getting a very complete traffic picture now in the U.S., and that we're able to hopefully avoid many of those things. They still unfortunately do happen, but really rare that once people are equipped that they do. So Canada is an opportunity and a problem. When you look at traditional diversity transponders, you're in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. You're maybe more. Installation's expensive.
For installation, yeah.
Diversity means an antenna on top and an antenna on bottom. And most people probably don't know that, because why would you? But it means your transponder, you can't just take two normal transponders. You have to have a special transponder that can alternate where it sends the information. And it's designed for jetliners so that when their TCAS or collision systems are talking to each other, that even when one's coming down on top of another jetliner, that they can see each other. Right. Now they would like to see it from space. And so, you know, we developed something very, very unique in this TailBeacon that basically splits the signal between the ground and the sky. And we've been working with COPA, which is the Canadian AOPA, if you will, and with NavBeacon, with the Ariane folks, to really prove the performance of the system. And what you've seen, and what we've seen, is that it performs equivalently to large aircraft with diversity installations. And that's what we need to be able to control it.
All in that tiny package.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so it's replacing what traditionally would be hundreds of pounds of gear in a lot of these aircraft, right? Because these are in big aircraft with tons of wiring and, you know, large avionics bays, right? And we're doing it in you know, a few ounces. So
now all your technology isn't obviously at the wingtip and the tail. I'll flip back on for a second here, and that obviously you've got panel products as well in the AV20 and AV30. Yeah. So and you're integrating these. So tell us a little bit about this. I know obviously you've got a friend of mine that's a brilliant engineer, Jeff Bethel, that was involved in the company before they were all, you acquired them. They're all together now at uAvionix. Tell us a little bit about these products and what they do and what the vision is, because I have to tell you, I'm awfully excited to see them also being put to use here.
Yeah, we're extremely excited as well. And like I think I said before the show, you know, all of our attention is on AV30 right now, and delivering the certification there.
And you have one in front of you, right?
Yeah, I do. I've got one here. It doesn't show as favorably in this lighting, but this is where's the webcam? So this is the device. It's got a fantastic AI, an exceptionally unique DG. We can get into that a little bit later. But at its core, again, going back to that, the uAvionix mission, reducing installation, but keeping the flying experience as pure as possible. Again, coming from rotorcraft, you're talking extremely expensive aircraft and designs that, just like in fixed wing, we're still flying designs that Howard Hughes did, right?
Mm-hmm.
The actual airframe is still the Hughes 500. It's seen iterations, but we're still flying that same airframe, and of course, like anything in aviation, you don't throw it away. You improve it, you refurbish it, but all glass panels, unless you're in a larger fleet or you have a new aircraft, are pretty rare in rotorcraft. It's all steam gauges, and so I love the look and the utility of a classic panel. I feel like I'm still flying the airplane; it's not flying me. Yeah. And I'm heads up. I'm not heads down, trying to wind my way through the menus. And so AV30 delivers that classic look and that classic performance, but with enhanced reliability and a ton of safety features that you can put on that same 3-inch display that used to serve a single function. Now you can have your AOA, you can have, essentially a VSI, your altimeter. You can combine it all into a single display, and not that you would reduce your scan or avoid your other instruments, but at a glance, you can get a lot of information out of that. Well,
I think one of the interesting things that I find about the AV30, in the similar way that there's this unique innovation in the way that you approached the Beacon products, is that what's unique about it to me is that you have this ability to actually change the way it looks to fit your preference. I mean, we've certainly always thought about things being mission-oriented in avionics, and certainly people have decluttered or allowed you to adjust where fields are on the screen. But I haven't seen something before where someone actually put a little fun into it and said, oh, well, if you have a vintage aircraft, you can make it look vintage. If you have a modern aircraft, you can make it look modern, or you can use our traditional view. I mean, you literally allow it to have what we always used to kind of call in devices like a skin on it, to look the way that that someone's personal preference is. That seems pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of TLC put into really looking at those graphics and really understanding. And we want it to disappear in a cockpit. Like Ryan, I come from flying a pretty vintage fleet. And the last thing I want to do is put a square box over a round hole. I really, really want to keep those panels looking about the same, but with a lot more capability. And so it might be hard to see when you look at the device, but it is a round gauge replacement. But instead of being a foot long, it's a few inches long behind the panel. And the key part of that was we wanted it to be able to change the colors, change the skins. And so we have 3 options on it, which is kind of a traditional view that you see there. There's an EFIS looking one that is not shaded, like a traditional ball would be on an AI. And then there's a vintage, which kind of is your black and white version, if you will. That would look more like you have on your car 3 or earlier aircraft. So
yeah, put it in a Cub or something like that. And what you said something, of course, that's really interesting, which is most of the time, if someone were developing avionics for the cockpit, what they'd probably be saying is, I want this to be the biggest, boldest, brightest thing that shows off someone's investment in front of them. And you just said, I want it to blend in with the cockpit and not be noticed.
Yep. I look at pictures of it in panels, and a lot of the time you can't even see, and this is great, a lot of the time you can't even see that the device is there. I mean, you really can. If the lighting is, it of course dims with the lighting, but it is really just seamless looking on that panel, and you struggle to pick out that there's even a piece of electronics in there. And that's exactly what we wanted it to be. And when we come to market with this, it's going to be available in 2 modes, an AI and a DG, so heading indication, DG, whatever you'd like to call that, and an AI. And so it can replace 2 instruments in the majority of aircraft out there. But we have great designs on this as a multi-function display, and many things that we're working to enable both in the experimental and the certified space. Of course, we work with ADS-B technology, and you can bet that we'll have ADS-B in with alerting and visualization pretty quickly on that, as well as autopilot interfaces, which we've promised and talked about as well, to both some legacy and more modern digital autopilots. And there's a whole host of other functions. Of course, we work with a lot of manufacturers and EFB makers, and there's a lot of unique functionalities that we can really use as a non-required instrument to use that really beautiful, high color display that just fits in a 3-inch hole perfectly.
Right. And at the price point that you're at, which I believe is just around $2,000 or under, for either an electronic attitude and primary have airspeed and direction, all that, as well as a DG with all that information that's on it. That's a pretty impressive point. And then the other unit, which also drew our attention there, is you try finding. I was surprised in our search with the Mustang, trying to find a G meter right now is not. They don't make them anymore, from what I can tell. You can find a few old mechanical ones that someone will refurbish, but being able to find that's what led us to the 20. And that unit is like $900. That's really impressive what's in that.
And that's certified under NORC, which is again a great innovation the FAA has come up with. That a lot of the angle of attack and some ADS-B systems are certified under now, and it really is a Swiss Army knife. It basically, what all can we do with a computer this size, right? And if we could do it, we were able to certify that. And so it has pitot-static. It has an emergency backup AI on it. It has angle of attack. Is really why a lot of people purchase it as a what we call probeless AOA. It does not require an addition of a new probe out on the wing or in the inspection port. So it actually uses some pretty smart electronics and algorithms to develop its model of your angle of attack. Timers, G meters, as you mentioned. It's amazing all the things that go in a little 2-inch package, and so that would go in call it a 2-inch clock hole or something similar to that.
Yeah, it's even got volts, and it's got a surprising amount into that package.
Yeah, and they both also have a backup battery. So if you lose aircraft power, they'll both continue to function. Maybe 32 hours.
Wow, that's impressive.
I think the last thing to bring together on that is these will be serving as the control heads for our TailBeacon-X, because TailBeacon-X, of course, has nowhere to push any buttons on. How do you dial that squawk code?
Right.
We enable a number of things. You can interface to EFIS systems. So hooking up to a number of existing EFIS systems out there through some existing protocols, or we have the control options both in the experimental and coming soon on the certified space to be able to control it from the AV30 and the AV20. So there will be ways to control this. Of course, we can't launch a transponder with no way to dial the squawk code, and those are, it's nice having that all kind of integrated in one spot there, without any additional pilot workload. It's really a nice interface and a nice UI. As a pilot, it's newer is not always better on some of those things, but I feel we've got a pretty good solution there. And it, again, really kind of declutters some of the panel.
Yeah, they're really interesting units, both inside and outside. And so as we approach the end of the program here, tell us what we created SocialFlight Live during this challenging time to support General Aviation. How are things at uAvionix, and how's life been during the crisis? I know it's been hard on a lot of companies. How have you been surviving?
Take it away, Ryan. Heads down.
Yeah. So internally, we've been pretty unimpacted, actually. Our manufacturing is up in Montana, where if you look at a map right now, we're the only state that's not bright red on most of the maps. So things are humming along from the manufacturing side, and that's something we didn't talk about is, and I don't want to segue into it, but once you certify the device, you still have to build it, and you have to build it under an approved process as well. And so you've got to have, an FAA inspected and approved manufacturing team and quality manual. But I don't want to go anyway. We've continued manufacturing throughout the pandemic. Our engineering team and a lot of our company is actually distributed. So most of our team actually already is pretty progressive and works from home. Unlike a lot of maybe traditional organizations that have been severely hampered by a lack of travel or the inability to have, more than 10 people in a gathering, we continued business straight through.
So you're basically built for this from the way that you formed your company, which kind of emulates Silicon Valley companies.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to the team. It's you need people with very specific skills and very specific roles, and you have to, in a sense, take them where you find them, because that's their value is in accomplishing a specific task. And so again, a lot of the engineering is kind of in the Midwest. R&D and manufacturing are up in Montana, as well as test flight. And with that distribution and the way that we work, we haven't been impacted. We know that obviously, on the revenue side, all of general aviation and commercial aviation has been severely impacted, and we're extremely aware of that, and doing everything we can to work with partners and do what small communities like aviation do, which is get through a very challenging time. At the same time, on the company side, we're looking forward at forecasts and components that may be in short supply or hard to get. Outside of aviation, just, I talk to people around the country. If you go to a recreational shop that sells motorcycles, or they sell RVs, or they sell vehicles, they're disappearing from the showroom floor, and they're not being replenished because their supply chain is impacted. I saw an article the other day that I believe Ford's worried they won't have engines for the Super Duty as a result of different market forces. And so we're looking forward to make sure that we can stay on track and keep people flying.
Yeah. We're well built for it, and we're well capitalized for this type of market as well. And we appreciate everything that you're doing at SocialFlight for this. I mentioned before, but I've been a member since 2013, and with our flying club, I'm in Chicago. That's a tool that we've used for years, dating back to I think even 2012, maybe shortly after it was founded, to be able to help organize events and find things to go do. As we would get 5-10 planes together and go to that pancake breakfast. That's always something that we've used. So really appreciate your efforts in that space, and be sure and give Jake our congratulations on the private pilot as well.
It's fantastic.
I will. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it. Obviously, we are all doing everything we can to support general aviation, and it is great news to see not only everywhere that you've come from to build uAvionix into what it is today, but to hear that things are still going strong and that you're looking forward and just accelerating into the future. Because I think that the more companies there are like this and the more innovation that comes to general aviation, the better it is for absolutely all of us. And so again, thank you so much, Ryan Reed, Ryan Braun, for joining us from uAvionix here on SocialFlight Live. Really appreciate all of that you are doing, and all of you for joining us for this show. And of course, as I mentioned, we will be back next week with a whole series of special programming that's going to be part of the Spirit of Aviation Week, partnered with Avidyne. You'll see some great guests having to do with that, so stay tuned. You'll get information at avidyne.com, as well as also from SocialFlight. And we will be back after that with normal SocialFlight Live programming, featuring Mike Bush, who will be joining us on July 28th. We'll be talking about engine diagnostics, which is always fun to use his expertise to learn tests that you can do while you're flying the aircraft, learn all sorts of things that are going on and figure out what exactly is going on. And then, if there's time, after that, we'll follow up in August, do some features here on our Mustang. So until next time, again, thank you so much for both of you for joining us and for everyone who's joining us here at SocialFlight Live. Blue skies.